Oh, thanks so much, Dave. This is beyond call of duty. So Dave's at University of Canterbury and is going to talk on, again, shipwreck and temperature and movement and a bit of stoats. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and let's hope the gremlins stay away. So what I want to, this sort of ties in with very interesting experiments Joe and Dean and so on have been doing, but this is observational. We've got some long-term data here that I thought would be relevant. And it's work done by Kelly, three of my students, Kelly Fitau, Holly Harris, and Laureline Rossignol, and a bunch of other people at the bottom there have been involved. And the picture is Craigieburn area where two of these studies come from. Kelly looked at rat tracking tunnel data from Nelson Lakes. Holly looked at trap catch data from Craigieburn, and Laureline looked at bird counts. So let's see how these relate together. So firstly, looking at Kelly's work, this is using rat tracking data from the Rotoiti Nature Recovery Project at Nelson Lakes, going back to 1998. And she did this work in 2017, so I think we have data through to 2016. And what we're trying to do is find out from this rather complicated observational data, can we sort of figure out the main factors which are determining the tracking rates of ship rats. And there are a lot of sites and a lot of years. This is a complicated looking graph, but there are a number of sort of simple things that come through. The first is that big seed years push the, which are the red arrows, big seed years push up the rats pretty much everywhere. Second thing is you can keep that down with 1080. These sites here in the blue circle were treated with 1080 before the tracking rates were measured, and that was quite effective. And the third point is that the lowest rat tracking rates pretty much throughout are the Mount Misery site, where Rotorua, where there was no treatment at all, so no stoat reduction. And so what comes out of it, essentially, this is the sort of fitted values from an overall model that considers all that data, and essentially what it shows is that stoat trapping does increase rat tracking rates, but that rat trapping on top of that does nothing at all because you can't trap them fast enough. And interestingly, the aerial 1080 and the brodifacoum, which was used only at the start, are both very effective. Some of these other toxins aren't necessarily ineffective, but they just weren't applied often enough for the model to give you a very good fit. So that and this does depend on the altitude and the seed fall. So this is fitted values again. Top line is against altitude, and the none and trap, the first two columns, that's rat trapping or not rat trapping, but stoat, which has no effect. But essentially there are fewer rats at high altitude. But if you trap the stoats, you get more rats. And similarly, you get more rats in a big seed year, and if you've trapped stoats, you get more rats. So those two factors are interacting. And it's interesting to note that this is different from what Wendy Rusko and so on found from the North Island from a rather well-run big experiment. This stuff's in review. It's been taking a while. Second study was looking at rats and thermal squeeze, and this is sort of accidental in a way. Holly Harris looked at the trap catch data from a community group that have been trapping at Craigieburn Forest since 2007, and when she first started looking at this data, I had no idea they were catching rats because we'd worked there earlier and there were no rats in the area. But since 2010, they've been catching a lot, and this stuff's basically almost accepted. And she talked about this last year's virtual Occult conference, so some of you may have seen this, but we've done a bit more analysis. So this is the total catch in each trap between 2007 and early 2020. And the blue circles are where it's caught a lot of stoats, and they tend to be more at high altitude. And the pink circles where you catch a lot of rats, and that's mainly at low altitude. And in the little inset, you can see there's a very strong effect of altitude on rats. So although they've moved into this area, they really moved in mainly below about 10-50 meters or so. And we know that there were no rats in the area before because Kim King's worked there between 73 and 82. She never saw a ship rat. We worked there for 5 years and only saw a single rat but and there were none in the community trapping in 2007, but since 2010 the numbers have been quite big, and the sort of fitted line says there's an increase. So why have they increased there over time? It could be higher temperatures, could be increase in seedfall, or it could be stoat trapping. Well, we can't test the stoat trapping because we have no non-treatment areas there, kill trap data. And what Holly found is that the winter temperatures, June to August average temperatures, have increased significantly over that time, and the seedfall, this is Rob Allen's stuff here, we're going back to 1972, which is our first year when we have some rat information, and the seedfall hasn't increased and the temperature has gone up. And you get a very nice sort of interaction between these two. The best predictor of rat models is the interaction between seed and winter temperature. And because only one of those temperatures changed, it looks as though essentially they have now moved into these mid-altitude forests below at Craigieburn, below about 10-50 meters. Classic example of thermal squeeze, and that could be bad news for the birds that depend on that. Which leads to the third study. This is Laureline Rossino, bottom left, and these other people all helped. Eric did a whole lot of bird counts in the 80s. We did some between 99 and 04, and then Laureline and David Flaspoler and Eki and various people did some to see what's happened now, and Rob Allen helped with the seedfall data. And there are a lot of bird counts, more than 10,000 bird counts, nearly all, mostly collected in the central area around the Broken River Skifield Road, but sometimes a bit of information from the Cheeseman and Craigieburn areas, different times of year, but essentially we had to try and standardize for that in the analysis. And we had a bunch of birds that were common enough to analyze, and the exotic birds basically, and here there's fitted values for two different seasons, summer and autumn. This is the chaffinch, and what you find is that essentially all 6 exotic birds showed a pulse, an increase in numbers when there was a big seed year. And this might be partly breeding, and it might be partly moving in from adjacent habitat to feed on the beech seed. Interestingly, all 6 exotics went up. Out of the native birds, only bellbirds showed any significant response to seed years, and that may be an artifact since they don't feed on the seed. Bellbirds, moving to the natives, bellbirds were the only bird which increased consistently over this whole time, with intermittent pest control early on and continuous pest control since 2007. And they really are the winners when you do stoat trapping, and that's consistent with our shorter experiment between 99 and 04 as well. Tomtits seem to have gone down, which was a worry, and then the most recent counts, they seem to be up again, and riflemen were doing something similar. Brown creepers are a bit odd. They were sort of sitting pretty stable, but when we went back in 2019, 2020, they seem to have collapsed a bit. But we'd really like to have a few more years to follow up on that. Not really quite sure what's going on. They're a classic kind of tend to be concentrated more at high elevation and maybe are a bit more susceptible to rats. And so if you look overall at the changes over decades, this is sort of between the first block of counts and the second, then from the second to the third. I think for the exotic birds, whether they were going up or down over that time may be related as much to whether they happened to be a big seed year. But with the native birds, it looks as though they were sort of patchy, more a mixture of increases and decreases early on, but that most of them, where there's been a change, most seem to have been benefiting recently, perhaps because the pest control has been more consistent. So what sort of what conclusions can we draw from these long-term observational studies? The stoat trapping does seem to allow rats to increase, which is, I think, an important point. We've got this amazingly well documented invasion of the lower forests at Craigieburn by rats, and those 2 prior studies not done for this purpose really, I think, make that quite compelling. And the bird changes are about as complicated and species specific as you would imagine. And I think John's talk earlier alluded to this. You need to know, are they more sensitive to rats or to stoats and so forth? What foods are they depending on, and how much are those foods going up and down? So that is it. Any questions? I'm not getting any.
Oh, I might be unmuted now. Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Dave. Obviously, short notice, it's great, and you're under time. I just seen any questions come up for you. Were there 1080 drops, Dave, at Craigieburn? You may have covered this in your talk. Did it get 1080 drops, or was it just stoat trapping by the community groups there?
It's never had 1080 drops. It's just trapping, and in fact, the other odd thing about it, which is probably different from most sites, is there's no possum kill trapping there nowadays, because there are sort of some kia in the area, and the possum traps are regarded as too much of a risk for kia. So it's really just stoats, and then the rats that you catch incidentally in stoat traps are all Doc 200s, I think.
Yeah, so do we take it, it sort of looks like the stoat trapping helps bellbirds, but if it increases rats, is that a bit of a dilemma? You know, that in a way the rat vulnerable species, whether maybe mohua or brown creeper might be in that category, but in a way they're not helped by stoat trapping, and certainly not by warming.
Yeah, well, I think, that's what Susan Walker et al., their thermal squeeze paper sort of raised us as a problem. And I think, this does show that the predators are moving up slope. And so you really do need to think, what are the consequences if you take the stoats out, if the rats are then increasing? And we were surprised to see the rats there, precisely because I thought Craigieburn was quite a good place because you could trap the stoats and you didn't have rats present. Well, now we do. It would be really nice to know, in fact, whether we can't tell in that observational thing whether the stoat trapping has made it easier for the rats to move in. But it does really highlight the dilemma, I think, that faces managers.
Yeah, I know when I wrote the sort of density section for ship rats in the latest handbook, it was very difficult to resolve this issue about top-down control of rats. There's quite different opinions around New Zealand. Murray Efford published after a very long-term study in the Rongos that cats seem to be important, and there are things in the literature of stoats, stoat control seeming to cause higher rats, some at Okarito and some in Northland from Kiwi work. It certainly would be an important thing to resolve, I think. I'm not seeing any other questions come up.
There's one in the, I think maybe in the presenter chat. Considering these results differ from Wendy Rusco's paper, why do you think these beech systems seem different to the more podocarp-dominated forests? That's a good question, and I guess I've just assumed that it's because it's such a simple system. There aren't a lot of other foods around, and so it's much more driven by variable seed crops, and of course they're much colder as well. So I assume that kind of simplifies things back a bit, and maybe then the stoats are able to have more of a significant effect.
And there's another question here from Josh Kemp. Dave, are the rats still there? Several other previously unratty sites got ratty between 2014 and 19, but crashed in 2020.
Last numbers I've seen are still catching them, yeah. I mean, they go up and down a lot, but they're still catching some even in the low years. Of course, even if we were catching none, there are probably still a few there, but I don't think that has happened since 2007, that they haven't caught any rats.
And where did the rats come from? Did they first hang around after a big mast?
We don't really know where they come from, but I'm just assuming they've had to move up from lower elevations. I mean, it would be nice to know. It's sort of funny because when you get out to lower elevations, it's a mixture of grassland and some sort of Manuka forest and a bit of beech. There's a settlement at Castle Hill Village there, and so I don't really know, but I guess we just assume they've moved up slope because it's now warm enough for them to survive there or something.
Why was the apparent large increase in long-tailed cuckoo not regarded as significant? Any reason why they may have increased?
Sorry, I'd have to have a look back at. We did analyse all the birds, and the Kia, we thought actually we recorded no Kia in all the samples this year, and we thought maybe there was a significant decline there, but it turned out there were more Kia recorded in the 2000s than in the 70s, so they were sort of up and down. The longtails also were quite uncommon, and I'd have to actually remind myself of what the longtail cuckoos did. Of course, the brown creepers are important for themselves, and they're also the host for the longtail cuckoos. So we've got two endemic birds here that could be possibly affected if the rats go up and make life hard for brown creepers.
There's a question here, has anyone completed, we'll say this is aimed at you, we'll have a conversation. Has anyone completed research on feral cats and how they impact on rat and mouse populations, or stoats for that matter, as a competitor? Have you got cats there?
They do catch a few, yeah. The Doc 200s, small cats manage to squeeze in, and small possums, and so we know there are a few. And actually, interestingly, cat catches have increased over time here, so we've seen more cats. And then it's not well designed for catching cats, but they have caught more cats in the second half of this period than they caught in the first.
Okay, yep. Great. Thanks, Dave.